And briefly, we can also talk about copying form versus understanding the underlying surface, or not underlying surface, but underlying structure within the surface, right, under the surface. So this is a concept by Carlos Huente, and the sculpt is done by Mats Koran. Beautiful. I mean, execution-wise, this is stunning. I mean, it's unbelievably impressive, just how close everything is looking to the concept, right? I mean, it's an achievement in itself. To me, the thing here to kind of watch out, and this is the caveat of copying things, is that some it's not even understanding of anatomy is needed when copying from something like this, when copying from a sketch, right? And this is clearly a sketch, right? Even though there's this is looking almost like a finished piece, it is nonetheless sketching. This is how Carlos works, right? So some of the elements are more polished than the others. The thing here to kind of watch out if you are going to be studying anatomy, or not studying anatomy, studying form based on either Carlos Huente, or I would also recommend going for something more classical. And by classical, I mean going all the way back to Michelangelo's sketches, or Raphael's, or Da Vinci's, those type of drawings, also studies, right? So because they are, in my opinion, in some sense they are better because because they can control the lighting, right? They can control where the shadows are, and they, in that sense, they can better visualize all the musculature, all the bumps, right? The bony structures and all those things. So very, very good resource as well, just to kind of study that, right? Not study the anatomy, but study the surface. But to get back to this, the kind of the caveat of, again, studying the surface rather than the anatomy. So the danger of copying, or the caveat when it comes to copying, is keeping a real, not real reference, but reference in terms like an atlas, anatomy atlas of in this case, either a human being or a tiger or a cat or whatever animal that this resembles, right? For one specific reason, not to be kind of caught up in terms of, okay, so this is a tricep, right, somewhere here, and then you would look at the reference, at the real atlas, and you would look at the tricep, and you'll kind of start to compare and maybe see, okay, this is looking somewhere in here, this is looking a little bit kind of up, maybe there's some division, and you don't really understand what is really happening, right? It's not about getting caught up with the actual anatomy. It's about not making mistakes of misinterpretation of what is on the surface. So in this case, this whole area is just a sketch, right? It's a kind of looking like that. There's almost like a bone structure somewhere in here, almost like something is taking place in here. And so the person here, to me at least, almost misinterpreted this as two bones, right? So this would be the pelvis bone, and this is also a pelvis, and they're kind of sticking out, right? So they're almost repeating this shape of the pelvis, which is very strange, because even though if this is a alien, it wouldn't make any sense if there would be two pelvic bones sticking out, because they also have a function, right? Everything within the body has a specific placement, because it's a function, right? And so if we have two legs and we have the same structure as a human being, two arms, right, an abdomen, a chest, and all of those things, it wouldn't make any sense for those kind of mutation to take place. On the one hand, on the other hand, it just doesn't really look pleasing. And this is not to say that what I have here is is more accurate than what I've just shown, right? So this, for example, would also not make any sense. But in this case, I would argue this is more extreme. The whole creature is a little bit more extreme. This here is a little bit simple, right? A bit simpler in terms of it's looking way more than a real creature, than the alien that we've just seen above, right? So this is the reason why I would say that whenever you are creating a character, a creature, and you're working on the form and then using some kind of reference for that, or reference like that, to create the surface, I would still recommend having a proper sheet of anatomy, right? When you can see the bones, you can see the muscles, and so in this way you are not creating mistakes of this kind of this nature, right? So very, very kind of simple thing to keep in mind. Be cautious what you're copying, but to keep on repeating this, copying still is a very, very, very useful exercise. It's to me a much better exercise than to studying the anatomy from the inside out. And the best resource for copying when it comes to human models is definitely 3D scans, and this is from 3dscanstore.com, and I've been kind of, I suppose, promoting that website for more than 10 years. The year that it came around, I was a big supporter of the platform. I know the guy who is in charge, and this is not some kind of endorsement. I'm not getting any out of this, right? I just think that this is a very, very valuable resource when it comes to reference, and not just reference, you can even use some of those elements. I mean, if you buy the right if you buy the right license, you can you can cut the leg, right, and you can put it on your character and then merge everything together, dynamesh it, and you get a perfect leg that on a character that is otherwise yours, but you need to have a proper license for that. But anyway, so this is a stunning reference for whatever it is that we're making when it comes to human characters, because we can see different body shapes. We see the musculature, we see fat tissue, not on this guy, but there are other models. We see female, male. There are almost not teenagers, but there is definitely younger, older models. So we see a big variety of pretty much every shape that is out there when it comes to human beings, right? The danger again here when it comes to using the reference like this is we need to understand something a little bit about the not just the body, but also about the environment and the technology itself. So it's almost, I would say, impossible to capture somebody, almost like a neutral stance. And let me just it's a bit complicated, but let me try and to explain what I mean. So look at this person. So he's standing, right? I mean, the arms, yes, they're in different angles, right? The hand here is higher than this one. So in this case, some of the muscles would be looking different just because there's a difference in angle, right? So this the forearm is more bent on this arm than it is on this arm, right? So some of the muscles in here are going to be a little bit more contracted than on this one. It's a small thing. It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that the pose cannot be perfect, right? I mean, we can be close to perfection, but it's not about that. Look at the legs. So he's just standing, right? There is nothing about it that indicates that there is something going on. He's just standing on two legs. There is no platform that is higher than the other. It's just floor, right? So everything is looking pretty good. But compare those two legs with one another. Here we see muscle going all the way like that. On this leg though, we see muscle stopping here, and then we see a little pouch. And this is something that if you look at the Greek classical Greek sculptures, you will definitely see a lot of this, right? I mean, if you look at your own legs, you will also see this probably, most likely. But to illustrate it even kind of further, if I mirror envel the model, just look how much is changing in here. And that's just the thing about those kind of references. This is the thing about using 3D scans, because the model at the time when the photos were taking to produce the 3D scan, the model might have just tilted just slightly, and I don't mean tilted the whole body this way. In this case, he might have tilted his pelvis just a little bit, and by tilting something like that would engage the muscles, right? So here the muscles are on the leg, and we call this, let's say, leg number 1, and it's going to be leg number 2. So leg number 1 in this case is flexed, leg number 2 is more relaxed, right? And this is something, yes, I would say, not even yes, it comes from anatomy books. It's not really. I mean, if we go back to what I've said about one thing to know about muscles, that the idea is that they contract, and that's why things are kind of moving, right? So the muscles in here, for example, they connect to this bone by tendon, and by when we flex the pec, the arm goes this way, right? Up, not up, but kind of here, right? Anyway, so that's that's just the mechanic of the muscles, right? And so if we understand that, we can probably understand that the reason why it's a little bit bigger in terms of mass, right, compared to this, is probably because it's flexed. If you enjoy this content or find it useful, please consider supporting me by buying me a cup of coffee via the link in the description. And if it is flexed, it's probably going to modify the surface that we do see here. So it is kind of anatomy understanding, not really anatomy, it's more about understanding of mechanics of the body, of the musculature, but that's not the important thing here. The important thing here, if we are using scans, and I would highly recommend use scans for studying and copying, right? Nothing good, nothing bad about that. The matter becomes, which one do you choose? Right? Do you choose number 1 or do you choose number 2? And I would say always go for something that is more aesthetically pleasing. And if you don't have this sense developed yet, and it will definitely come the more you study the surface, the more you do the observation of the surface, the more you do the observation of the examples that are out there. And in this case, if you don't understand which one is looking better, if you cannot judge it by yourself at the moment, I would say go to art station, go to film screenshots or video game screenshots, and just look at what is more relevant, what kind of examples are out there. And I would argue that most of the characters that you would see, if they do have their legs kind of opened up, you would see more of this more examples of number 1 than number 2, because in most cases the characters that we do see on the screen, the characters that we do see in video games, they are more flexed up, because it's well, I suppose it's there's something about us that makes us like looking at lean kind of musculature bodies compared to something that is less so. That's just my understanding of it, right? There's something about it, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to have a musculature body kind of prevalent in most of the advertisement, for example, or in most video games. So there's something about that. And so if you cannot judge whichever that you want to choose for your character, be it a leg, be it an arm, be it the back, be it the front, right? Always go with either something that you see out there, or I would also say go for something that is less crowded, and it's a bit more kind of complex. I would say it's a bit more nuanced and maybe even contradicting itself. But in this example, look at this arm. So we have a shape here, we have a shape here, we have a shape here, here, and then we have here. If we look at the other side, well, we mostly, I guess, what we see is this, maybe this, and this. And so I would argue that this and this would be number 1 also, right? And this is going to be number 2. I would argue that number 1 wins then when it comes to the surface, the pleasant feeling that we get when we look at the surface. There is, in my mind, there is no point in recreating the complexity that we see on the second, on the arm number 2. The only reason why you would create something like this when it comes to complexity, if the person that you're creating, the character that you're creating, requires this, right? There's something about them that speaks to their character, and then you can do that. Or if there's some kind of an alien or mutant or whatever it might be, or maybe it's a very specific style that the art director is asking you, that the style of the whole kind of game or the whole project is that you want things to kind of stick out almost, right? So in this case you would go for this, but in general I would recommend going for something a little bit less complex, even though the leg number 1 is more complex than the leg number 2, but really the complexity here is just 3 shapes. And if you look at the anatomy atlas, just like I said previously, still have it open somewhere, right, in reference, you would understand that this kind of complexity, those 3 shapes, it's not really a complexity, it's just those muscles that are within the body. The complexity in this case is different, right? We have this huge break within the muscles, and that would be the kind of complexity that you need to study for, right? The anatomy, you need to understand why exactly this is taking place and what is it in the first place, right? And I would again say that this is a little bit beyond that is required from anybody who is doing any character work within the industry environment. The same goes for the back as well. If we look at the back, look at just the shadows, we see this shape, we see this shape, we see this shape, we see some of them here, and in this case it's just one shape here, one shape here, and then there is this something going on there, right? So what I would argue, go for in this case number 1, excuse me, then the number 2. So it's kind of simplified, right? Just a little bit bigger shapes, more kind of smoother looking, more organically looking than the complexity that we see here. And also be very cautious of those kind of things, those striations that we do see here, right? It's also something that may be a good idea to understand. Maybe I would also argue that not so much necessary, but just go for something that is a little bit simpler, right? No need to create all of this crazy stuff, because, well, there's a reason why this is taking place, and this is something that you would see maybe once out of 100 examples of a human body, right? Because the person is so lean, and because the complexity is just beyond what you required to do. And to mention one last thing about 3D scans, about this kind of reference, is that we need to, well, understand just one simple thing, that a human body is never symmetrical, purely symmetrical, right? 100%. It's always different. Everything, not because of the pose of the character, the pose of the model. It's not about necessarily that. It's about it's about what's really going on inside the body, right? And how muscles in this case might have just naturally developed, or he in this case developed those kind of muscles. It's impossible to be purely symmetrical, right? So if we again compare, even though he is in some sense leaning a little bit, right? So the whole section in here is just a little bit kind of off. Nonetheless, this is not about the pose itself, it's also about the structure. So none of those references that you might get from, in this case, 3D scan store, right, would look identical. And in this And in this case, I would also recommend using this mirror and weld this mirror and weld tool to create something crazy like this. But I mean, to use it to understand a little bit about the asymmetrical the asymmetrical nature of bodies, and then by kind of flipping, right, creating the pure symmetry, observing what is really changing, and then choosing whichever side that you prefer, whichever form that you think is looking better to you, and then try and copy and recreate that. And so in this case, for example, look, we see the situation of the biceps in here, right? Here it's almost just one shape, but here we see this going on, right? Again, you can understand that, you can study for that. My argument would be, what for? Does it really help you if you understand why this kind of situation happened? If you want to create this kind of situation, it's not going to be based on anatomy books. It's going to be based on your observation. It's going to be based on the reference, the kind of reference you're going to gather. And so that always beats understanding in this case. If this was a situation where we are making a model that is something like this, yes, I would 100% be behind the idea of studying anatomy, because whether this arm is flexing or this one, it will modify the surface, right? If on the other hand what we need to do is a static pose with arms going this way, I would argue go for something that you do like, something that is required either by your own personal taste, by the standards of the industry, or by art director, by the creative director, whoever is in charge of the project. So go for that, but still copy things, copy instead of study them, but be really good at mimicking the surface rather than understanding what is creating the surface in the first place. You will be much better off, in my opinion. And also, to finish it up, there is no textbook, there is no anatomy book that will explain to you what the surface, or I guess not the surface, but the depth of limbs, the depth of the body look like. There's absolutely no way for you to, by studying the anatomy atlases and by studying the musculature, to understand what the surface, what the shape of the limbs really is. And for this kind of exercise, scans are absolutely perfect, right? Because you can dissect the body, dissect the limbs in any way you want, and this way you can understand what kind of depth there is to the body, right? So it's not going to be a barrel, that something that you might have heard, that the human body, if you can simply simplify shapes, is going to be like a barrel. It's not really a barrel, it's almost like an oval, right? If anything, that's happening here. But obviously it depends on the kind of physique that the person has, what kind of how much fat the person has, and all those kind of things. But this is something also that you can study by using the actual models, right? The actual representation of a human being, rather than the anatomy atlases, and studying the bones and the muscles. This is way better for you to understand how everything is supposed to be looking, like what kind of depth, what kind of shape, and all of those things. You cannot you cannot create a shape based on a 2D image with the Latin names. So again, I would argue that copying versus understanding, and form versus anatomy, is more efficient if we study that, when it comes to, at least again, like I said, when it comes to work within the specific constraints. And the specific constraints are always there in the industry, right? We are not sculptors. This is doing 3D character art.